What if your spirituality is actually robbing you of power? That's what we're talking about today. And I want you to stay with me until the end because we're going to explore a way that you can take that power back. This is a conversation that may be triggering to some. That's okay. I want you to sit with it because there's a truth here that I know I've witnessed in my own life and in the lives of many who I've worked with and known over the years. And it's something that's only become clear to me in the last perhaps year or so. You probably think that I'm talking about dogmatic religion taking power from its parishioners or its church members. That can absolutely be the case. Growing up in a Catholic environment, we gave our power away to the Pope. We gave our power away to the priest. We did not realize, we were not taught that we had our own intrinsic and deep connection with God. We believed that we had to go kneel before some man in a box and confess our sins, or that we had to go to someone else to mediate between us and our Creator. And when I left that religion or perspective or way of life, it was so empowering to realize that I get to have my own relationship with my own understanding of the Creator. And this happened through things like meditation and sacred mushrooms, cannabis. There were many, many ways that I connected to what I understood as God, going into the nature, being quiet, solitude, alone. And it can become a slippery slope. Now, in the what is perhaps called New Age spirituality, there are tons of approaches of ways to communicate with the divine, and all of them have value. But what we find out is that sometimes, if we're not careful, perhaps due to conditioning, perhaps due to just human nature being what it is, we give that power away again and again. One of the most compelling instances for me is the subject of synchronicities. I am absolutely someone who believes and has experienced on multiple occasions that, call it angels, call it God, call it the universe, is communicating with me through synchronicities. So these may be people that I meet. These may be circumstances that I find myself in. Oftentimes there's this conversation of angel numbers, and absolutely there are times when things line up in my external world that validate to me that something is on the right track. And we can find ourselves depending on those external sources of validation to make a move. You see, one of the big realizations that I've had in the last several years in my own spiritual path is that the material, physical world is deeply spiritual. For the most of my life, I believe that the spiritual world was the opposite of the material world, and that enjoying or adhering to the material world was anti-spiritual. This can set up a path of spiritual bypassing, of spiritual laziness, of physical laziness. You can sit in meditation for your entire life with all these great ideas and accomplish nothing because you choose to sit there. I worked with an individual many, many years ago who spent, it must have been hundreds and hundreds of hours sitting in lotus position. And this, in his early years, and this is something he confessed to me, in his early years, he believed that he was being very productive, staying connected spiritually, spending so much time in meditation. He spent so much time in meditation that his legs were so bowed he could barely walk. I suspect now, some 10 years later, he's having even greater difficulty if he's still around. This is a really plain example of the spiritual devotion that actually becomes a way of not engaging with life. And that, in my view, is a pretty unhealthy spirituality. The same thing for me with cannabis. I spent so many years with cannabis as my spiritual tool that it became a daily habit and prevented me from taking action and doing the things that I really needed to do. I look back on those years with a lot of regret and think that I could have done some amazing work had I not been so spiritual with my cannabis use. Again, if you listen to the last video on victimhood, I'm not going to fall into that. I could look at my adherence to Rasta culture and I could blame those who influenced me in that way. I'm not. It was me. I did it. It happened for me somehow. And yet I look back on it with a bit of sorrow because I see that in this escapism, this spiritual escapism, was really just expressing a form of laziness, expressing a form of evading making a decision. And I think that is the biggest trap when it comes to this kind of spiritual bypassing. When we talk about spiritual bypassing, we always speak in terms of, avoiding the hard thing, using spiritual principles. This shows up in rather than having a healthy boundary and staying in contact with people, maybe we just completely cut someone off and say, I'm not going to be, I'm sorry, I'm setting a boundary for myself and completely disengaging. Now, sometimes there are people that you have to completely disengage from. If you have anyone in your family who is absolutely a clinical narcissist, that is a dangerous personality and they are just simply going to abuse you. And I would encourage you to have a very clear boundary, perhaps one that is no contact. I've had to do that in my own life. But if our boundaries are excuses for having the difficult conversations, engaging in the difficult relationships that we know are meant to help us grow as people, then that is absolutely spiritual bypassing. And it is a very dangerous form of spirituality because it has the opposite purpose. It takes your power away. When you say, I'm not going to be around this person because I have my spiritual boundary, and yet that relationship is an incredible opportunity for you to grow and become the next highest version of yourself, you've lost so much power over your own life. And I want to encourage all of us to explore the places in our lives where we could be a little more forthright, a little more stand up in our spirituality, where we can actually make the difficult decisions to do the things that will help us become the person that we're meant to be. Because spirituality is not about staying stagnant, stuck on a yoga mat. Spirituality is becoming the highest expression of yourself. Spirituality, true spirituality, is pushing your boundaries to become greater and greater throughout the course of your life. I'm not speaking just of material greatness. I'm not talking about just financial success. If that feels relevant for you, then absolutely. For some people, the boundary to push is the one to be less materialistic, to be less focused on material. You can only know yourself, and that is where the real power lies, and is in the relationship that you have with yourself and your own spirit. I've had a number of friends over the years who will not make a decision without pulling a tarot card. I had a relationship I was in for several years, and it was hard to get anything done because we were waiting for the right tarot card to get pulled. Now, I'm not inherently opposed to tarot. I think that these tools that people use can often get misused and overused and can become a crutch by all means. I personally believe that even the Bible, a book that I love dearly, can be misused in this same way. Rather than thinking for ourselves, we can look to this text as the be-all, end-all authority. Now, whatever you think, the reality is that is a book that has been manipulated and modified by human beings. The story of Gilgamesh and the flood is the story of Noah. There are stories that are almost identical in Sumerian text to the stories of Moses, a young boy orphaned, sent down in the river in a basket, found by royalty, adopted, who became royalty and then helped to overthrow the wicked kingdom. These stories don't simply belong to one single text. And I don't mean that to offend anyone, but anytime we put the power in a single item, a single approach, then we have disempowered ourselves. It is extremely important for our own spiritual growth that we explore the possibilities, that we explore that there are many modalities and that not just one thing should ever be the final say on how we live our lives. Spirituality is not stagnant. Spirituality, true spirituality, does not become dogmatic to New Ageism or to standard Christianity. I love both. I've mixed my world. I mixed both of these worlds. I have studied so many different schools of thought and teachings on spirituality. The teachings of Rudolf Steiner are currently some of my favorite because he blends this esoteric understanding, this mystical understanding, with a grounded, science-based Christianity. And I believe that this is the key to successful spirituality, is having a balanced perspective. I think the most apparent way that we give our power away in our spiritual work is by outsourcing our authority. And that's ultimately what I've been talking about in the use of tarot cards or the I Ching, or even, like I said, the Bible is the be all end all. Anytime we outsource our authority and don't listen to our own internal compass, well, we're giving our power away. We are no longer sovereign. And that, I want to start to introduce, is the key to living a true and authentic spirituality. Is you must be sovereign within your own self. You must know that in your heart, in your mind, you are connected to the infinite, and that whatever the question, whatever the circumstance that you need to address is, that you can find the answer within yourself, and that you don't need to go to the tarot cards or even to the Bible for the solution. Again, I love them all. I think they all have value. It's when anything becomes the final say. And then the last way that I want to talk about giving our power away within our spiritual work is through making healing a destination. Now, this is a little more obscure. We don't often consider emotional healing as part of our spiritual work. In my world, it is. Our physical healing is part of our spiritual work. We are here to be the highest manifestation of God's creation that we can be. And that is an infinite process. Again, back to the teaching of Steiner and many other traditions, I personally believe that we will return to this life, that I have lived here many times before and that I will be here many times again. And I will always have work to do. There is always a path of progression. So whenever we tell ourselves that, when I've healed this or that, when I finally got to this perspective, I'll be happy, I'll feel whole, I'll be able to connect with God, then we are shortchanging ourselves. We're giving away our power. All you have to do is realize right now that it never ends, that this journey is the destination. That is so powerful. That's how we become sovereign. We realize through infinite space and time, we will continue to return, and that these rules that are often deemed as the moral authority are just constructs of the time. There have been so many rules that have changed and shifted over the years, over the millennia. Back when we were a female-run world, when matriarchy was the standard, you can bet the rules were very different. It doesn't mean that the rules now or then are inherently right or wrong. Yes, there are behaviors and actions that are inherently right and wrong. Love, compassion, forgiveness, those are good things. We know that. But they aren't wrapped in a rule book. They're circumstantial. Sometimes compassion means a hard boundary. Sometimes compassion means softness. Sometimes the warrior is the most spiritual person, and sometimes the monk may be the most wicked. It is incredibly important that you find your own way, that you find your way to love, that you find your way to compassion, that you find your way on your own to realizing that ultimately it is your consciousness that is connected to the Creator, that is connected to the All. And it is a beautiful journey that only you can explore for yourself. So while all of these tools are amazing, the mushrooms are another big one, y'all. This is where I've fallen short in my life. I have said, I have to go to the mushroom to get the answer. And of course, the mushrooms are powerful communicators. There are powerful ways to connect to that intelligence, and many answers can be found there. But when something becomes the only method, when this is the way, then we're off the spiritual path and we've got into dogma. So I want to encourage you to continue finding your own path, continue finding your own way. You are a sovereign being. It is just you and God. Everybody else, we're just actors in your play. So what are you going to do with it? How are you going to continue to explore different ways of connecting? How are you going to find the things that are truly belong to you and are very helpful and are an important part of your life, but not adhere to them with a dogma that places them above even your connection to the Creator, your connection to Source, your connection to infinite consciousness? You're a sovereign being, and I want to encourage you to know that and live that. Put down the tools for a little while. Sometimes that's the thing to do. That's what I've done with mushrooms. I still have consumed them. My last big dose was in September, about a year, going on a year ago, about 9 months ago. I have one coming up. I can feel it coming. But I recognized at a certain point that I was putting too much emphasis on the mushroom. It is an amazing tool that I'm so grateful for. And it's just a tool. So be sovereign, be whole, be blessed. Be back next time. I hope you're enjoying this content. Like, subscribe, share. Hit me up on the socials. Much love.